So I'm going to do our live Skype for the circulatory system. I know Unit 3 involves the circulatory system and the immune system, but that will be a very long session and a very long recording, so I like to divide it up. So I've already posted a pre-recorded review of the immune system that you can view at your leisure on our website, or on our Brightspace website. So it's in the discussion video place where you would also post answers to questions if you weren't able to participate live in the Skype session. So this evening we'll do the circulatory system, and I have some review questions that we'll kind of peek at the end of this recording. And then if you like, or if you maybe you already have, you can take a peek when you're ready at the immune system recording that I've posted. And then I posted a separate recording with the review questions for the immune system. All right, so let's get going then. Let me get myself a pen here. So just to talk briefly about test number 1. So I was, most people did very well, so I was happy with that. Going into test number 2, sometimes students find it a bit trickier because it is on a lot of heavy-duty topics. The immune system alone can be a bit tricky for some. So make sure you're doing, great review in your textbook. Like, look at the questions at the end of chapters. My review questions that I give you in videos are, they're a pretty good indication for the types of things that you could be asked in a test. So make sure you know the answers and know why that's the right answer. So even though I give you the right answer, don't just memorize that question and answer. Try to figure out why that is the correct answer and why the other ones are not right. That will really help you in the understanding. But hopefully everything goes smoothly for test number 2 as well. I don't think we really need to review Skype. I sometimes put it in here just in case someone's having some troubles, but I see you guys are using the chat box. You don't have to use your video or voice, so that's okay. If you do want, when I do the questions, at the end, it's just a matter of clicking on the right answer. It's poll, it's a live kind of thing. It doesn't show everyone else what you've answered, but it does show you, or who's answered what, but it shows what the most commonly answered question or answers are. So it's just a matter of clicking on the screen. So chapter 23, so we've kind of done respiration, and so now we're going to look at the circulatory system part of that. So here's a few chapter objectives that are there. There's also a study guide for test number 2 that you can find on Brightspace. I believe it's in the extra resources you'll find at the end of, it's end of Unit 3, I believe. It could be the end of Unit 4. I'd have to go back and check, but there is extras posted at the end of that unit where you'll find a study guide. So in the chapter, it does talk about athletic endurance. So that's what this picture has to involves. And so we've talked about already, how our lungs exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide and give off carbon dioxide. So there's all kinds, when people are highly athletic, there's all kinds of things about our cardiovascular system that makes it easier or harder for us to participate in these things, and how conditioning and working that our body improves that. So we'll look at that a bit toward the end. So kind of the beginning of your chapters always kind of start off with the fact that all living organisms they have things in common, and then we go more into the human side of things. So every living organism on the planet must exchange materials, so that could be oxygen, carbon dioxide, food or nutrient materials. They all have to exchange things with your environment. And so a lot of it depends upon diffusion, so being able to move things from the outside environment to the inside environment. And for circulation, it requires some kind of circulatory system or some way for, the nutrients or chemicals that our body needs to get to all parts of ourselves. So it starts off talking just briefly about like an open circulatory system. So a lot of mollusks and arthropods, it shows a grasshopper here, would have this type of circulatory system. So it does have a type of heart that will pump fluid, but it pumps it like in from the body and back out to the body through open-ended vessels. So the fluid that it's pumping is just kind of circulating freely all among the cells of the grasshopper, for example. If that were to happen in humans, we use blood that's contained within our vessels. If all of our vessels were open, in fact, like if one vessel is open, you get a bruise or a hematoma, right? So it doesn't work out so well for this system, wouldn't work out so well for humans. But it is for, some lower level animals. So in a closed circulatory system, so it could be, like an example is how this fish, how their circulatory system works. So it's closed, so all of the circulating fluid is contained within vessels or within a set of tubes, as it says here. So it's different from the interstitial fluid. So they have a fluid inside their circulatory system, and then there's a separate fluid that just bathes around all of the body's cells. This system is a bit different in how ours works because it's just one loop. So this here would be kind of the pump, and then it's going just in one loop around. So it comes over here to the gills, keeps going out to the body, past the gills out to the body, and eventually makes its way back to the heart. So that is different from humans because we have kind of two circuits. So it's called a double circulation system, and it's the same for a lot of amphibians or reptiles, most I think all mammals. It kind of flows in two separate loops. So you have one loop that is going out to the lungs, and then it comes back into our central pump, which is our heart, and then our central pump pumps it out to our body. It comes back in, and then our central pump pumps it back out to our lungs. So it's kind of it's a double circulation, it's called, or it has two separate circuits. And these are the main things that it has: that central pump, the vascular system, and the circulating fluid. So for us, we call it blood. So question 1, if you want to answer over in the messages, or you can actually, if you want to, on the top right hand of the question, there's a little pen. You could mark it right on the screen if you like. But which of the 3 types of vessels are responsible for exchange? So exchange of materials out to our cells. Oh, hi Heather, I didn't notice you had even joined us. I'll write you down for a participation point. So Heather said C, capillaries. I have a B. And the answer is capillaries. So we'll look at that a little bit. So the capillaries are the tiniest vessels in our body. So these capillaries you will find everywhere, like in your fingers, your feet, your kidneys. You're going to find these little capillaries all over your body, and that is actually where the exchange of nutrients and oxygen and carbon dioxide and other waste products happens through these tiny little blood vessels. And noting that, I did add a little video that's under 10 minutes to our discussion board with the videos on Unit 3, and I take you through the entire circulatory system. I just talk you through it, so that could be something that helps you in your studying if you want to check that out. I think it's 9.5 minutes or so, and I start off with some blood being in a capillary and go through all of the anatomy back out to the capillaries. So we'll talk, so this diagram, it shows our arteries and how arteries are kind of the biggest vessels carrying oxygenated blood away from the heart. And then they get a little bit smaller into arterioles, then they're even smaller into capillaries, and this is where a lot of the exchange happens. Oxygen's given off, carbon monoxide is picked up, and then the capillaries turn into the venules, and then venules get a little bit bigger into veins, and then they go back to the heart from there. So again, that video I posted goes through that whole process, and I'll do it a bit here too. So blood returns through the veins. So blood is always leaving the heart through the arteries. And so one way I remember this is, I'll write it here, arteries equals away. So they both start with A, and that helps me remember that arteries are always moving blood away from the heart. And then, see if I can make that a bit bigger. And then as it says in this slide, blood returns to the heart via the veins. So arteries go away from the heart, veins are going back to the heart. So how does the blood get back to the heart? We are tall creatures, and especially if we're standing, how does blood get back from our feet up into our chest? So one thing that happens is we have skeletal muscles that are almost always nearby our veins, and as we're moving our muscles, even just small like flexes of our muscles, it helps to push blood back up. And then also as our heart kind of pumps, it's pushing it as well, but blood pressure isn't as high in the veins, so we have these little one-way valves within our veins that help keep blood from flowing back when it shouldn't be going back. It needs to be going forward back to the heart. So if anyone has had varicose veins, it's actually these little valves inside our veins that fail, and it allows blood to pool in that vessel. So that's what a varicose vein is, when you can see them through your skin. Question 2. So blood leaving the heart would flow from which of these would it be? So if it's immediately leaving the heart, it's going to be going away from the heart in what? That's correct. It's A. So it leaves the heart via our biggest artery in our body, which is actually called the aorta, and then goes to arteries, and then arterioles, capillaries, and then the capillaries turn into the small venules, which get a little bit bigger into veins. And those veins actually end in the biggest veins in our body, which are the superior and inferior vena cava. So I'll show you that in a diagram. So this is a little, this diagram. I believe this one is in your textbook as well. So it doesn't have all of the anatomy labeled on it, so it can look a little bit less distracting than some of them. So it might be one that you use. It just shows the pathway of blood through the heart, and it shows which ones. So the red would be oxygen rich, and the blue would be oxygen, or be poor in oxygen. So it's kind of starting at like up here. So say you have the blood from your earlobe is coming back. It's used up all its oxygen. It's now low in oxygen, so it needs to come back into the heart. So it's coming in here through our superior vena cava, which is the largest vein. And it's always coming from our body into the right side of the heart, which is our right atrium, is the first stop. So the atriums are the smaller chambers of the heart. And then when the atrium pumps, it'll pump the blood into this larger ventricle on the right side of our heart. And then when a ventricle pumps, it's going to pump it out into our lungs, because oxygen poor blood needs to become oxygen rich blood in order to go back out to our body. So the right side of our heart is pumping that blood out to our lungs. So right here, so often you will hear that arteries are what carry our oxygen rich blood. So in general, that's very true, that arteries are usually the ones that have a good oxygen supply, that carry the blood that has a good oxygen supply. Here's our one structure that does not apply to. So artery, this is called a pulmonary artery. So it's still an artery and it's going away from the heart, but this is the one place where we will have oxygen poor blood in an artery. Let me label that guy. We'll see him on some other diagrams here too, but I'll mention it now. Pulmonary artery. The one artery with low O2. Why does it have to be? There we go. So then once our blood has gone into the lungs to give off the carbon dioxide waste and to pick up oxygen, it leaves our lungs to come into the left side of our heart. The first stop is the left atrium. The left atrium squeezes the blood into the left ventricle. And then the left ventricle has the biggest job of pumping blood out to the rest of your body. The first stop it goes through this large artery, which is our aorta, and then is circulated from there out to our body. So I did leave this diagram here because I was going to go over all of that, but I put it in a separate video so that it's easier for everyone to find. So that video is already posted, where I go step by step through the blank heart, discussing the anatomy and the path it takes, so you can check that out there. That way no one has to find it in the middle of a long Skype recording. Question number 3, blood route through the heart. So would it be right atrium to right ventricle to lungs, to left atrium to left ventricle? Or is it going to start in the left atrium to left ventricle to lungs? Or is it going to go right atrium, right ventricle to aorta, to lungs, to left atrium, to left ventricle? So some of these questions are kind of like, you really do have to make sure you're reading the whole thing, make sure you're making sense of each option. And take your time in your test. You have lots of time given to you to do your test. It sometimes helps to even cover up all of the answers. Think of the answer first in your head and then rule each one out as you go. So I have a couple of B's. So the answer is actually A. So the blood is going to start in the right side of the heart. So right atrium and right ventricle. And then the right ventricle pumps it out to the lungs and then comes back to the left atrium or to the left side of the heart. And then it goes out to the body. So the correct answer is A. So I believe Mastering Biology also has some good study things to watch for the heart, or even if you enjoy looking for YouTube videos or whatever. You can find some good ones, if the ones I've posted are not doing it for you. Yes, looking at a mirror image, exactly. So that is a big thing. So if you see a picture of a heart like this, remembering that this would be you looking at someone standing in front of you. So that's the same with a lot of anatomy drawings, meaning this would be the right side and this is the left side of the heart. So this heart would be inside someone that you're looking at that's facing you. So systole and diastole, or systolic and diastolic. So that may sound familiar when you're talking or hearing about blood pressure. So if a typical blood pressure, say, or an average is 120/80, so what does 120/80 mean? So those two numbers are measures of pressure in your artery. So the top number is always higher, and so the top number is actually the systole, or systolic pressure. So the top number, if you have 120, would be this systolic pressure. And the bottom number, if it were 80, would be this diastolic pressure. So what does it mean? So systole is when your heart is contracting and forcing blood out of it. So when these ventricles contract and force blood out to the lungs and out to the body, that's when you're going to have the highest amount of pressure being exerted on the inside of your arteries. And so this 120 is a reading of that pressure on the inside of your arteries when your heart is contracting. So systole is heart contracting. Why am I going to try to write with this? I don't know. Heart contracts. Oh gosh, that's bad. And then over here, diastole, so it's also a measure of force being exerted on your arteries, but it's while your heart is relaxed. So in between pumping, when the ventricles are relaxed and new blood is flowing into your heart, that is the bottom number of 80, which is an average. So systole, when your heart's contracting and forcing blood out. Diastole is when your heart is relaxing and allowing blood to flow back into it. And that's represented by blood pressure. So optimal, like I said, or an average kind of blood pressure for adults would be somewhere below, ideally, 120/80. So question 4 there is, how is high blood pressure, or in other words, hypertension, defined? So is it a persistent systolic higher than 140, or diastolic higher than 90, persistently higher than 120/80, or blood pressure higher than 160/90? So Diana said A, and that is true. So if you get a few different readings from your healthcare provider that are 140/90 and higher, you will probably get diagnosed with hypertension. So heart murmurs are something to think about. So Have any of you or your children had heart murmurs when you were younger or currently? It's sometimes a pretty common thing to hear about. So most heart murmurs are actually caused by, so when you see the picture of a heart, in between like the atrium and the ventricle, like right here, or going out to the pulmonary artery, or when you're coming, in between this right side of the heart, in between these areas there are these valves that prevent blood from flowing backwards where they shouldn't be. So if blood's supposed to go from an atrium to a ventricle, you don't want it then flowing back into the atrium where it's not supposed to. So actually a heart murmur is often when blood is flowing where it's not supposed to through these valves. So valves don't close all the way, or don't close properly, and then blood is flowing back through them, and you can hear that with a stethoscope if you know what to listen for. It makes odd little whoosh sounds when there shouldn't be those sounds in the heart. So heart murmur has to do with valves not working properly. All right, so your book also touches on pacemakers. So some of you may know somebody that's had a pacemaker put in after they've had heart disease or heart issues. So their heart's not beating adequately. And so you can have a pacemaker inserted that's kind of like, it provides electrical stimulation to the heart in order to give it the proper amount of beats per minute or for it to beat effectively. So what makes your heart beat without a pacemaker? So inside, on the inner part of our right atrium, so up here in this little tiny heart diagram, in our right atrium, so the first little chamber that blood flows into from the body, there's a tiny little node, which is like a collection of nervous tissue, and it's called the pacemaker of your heart. So it's like the natural pacemaker of your heart. So another word for that is the SA node or sinoatrial node. And this little guy is actually what sets the pace for your heart to beat regularly and properly. And it sends another little signal to another little bunch of nerves that causes the heart to beat, the ventricles then to beat again. So what a pacemaker does is it connects, so it's a battery operated device that actual electrodes are attached to this SA node in your heart, and it's basically like a reminder telling it you need to beat this often, and it keeps it at a certain pace. And sometimes it only kicks in when it falls below a certain heart rate or whatnot, but that's what a pacemaker does. So when maybe you've done the heart rate lab, or maybe you take your heart rate now, but where do you typically fall in your heart rate per minute? Typically below 70? I haven't been exercising as much this winter, so my heart rate is typically a little bit higher, which is not the best. You're below 72? You guys must be fit. Yes, your Fitbit? My Fitbit's battery is dead, so maybe that's part of my problem. So typically someone that's a little more fit or used to cardiovascular exercise would have a lower heart rate because your heart is actually a bit stronger, so it can pump blood more effectively without having to have a higher rate. If you're less fit, your heart rate could be a bit higher because in order to get your heart your cardiovascular health isn't as good, so your heart has to beat faster in order to get the same amount of oxygen around. So it's typically good if your heart rate's a little bit lower, so good for you guys. So which of these diagrams illustrates pulmonary circulation? Would it be the right-sided diagram or the left-sided diagram or both? So this goes back to what we were talking about, that we have two different circuits in our own body. Someone said C. Well, this is actually two different circuits. So over here, the blood is going from our heart out to our lungs. So this is actually called the pulmonary circuit. So the left-sided diagram is the correct answer. It's the pulmonary circuit. And then over here, this represents our systemic circuit, which means the blood is leaving the heart to go out to our body and then back to our heart. So pulmonary is this part that involves the lungs, and systemic is the other part that involves the body. And those two diagrams are explained and in your textbook as well. So again, this is another diagram, and the path of blood is described, and this is in your textbook. And I believe it's also in Mastering Biology, and I did a step-by-step in that video that I posted for you guys. So this shows the starting point of blood being here in the atrium, and then it shows the atrium pumping it into the right ventricle. The right ventricle pumps it out through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs, both sides. From the lungs, it comes back into the left side of the heart here. That's the left atrium. And the left atrium pumps it into the left side of the heart, into the left ventricle. The left ventricle pumps it out through this largest artery. Remember, arteries are going away from the heart. So out through the artery, so the largest one's the aorta here. The arteries start to get smaller and smaller into arterioles until eventually there are capillaries, and that's where all the hard work happens, exchanging materials. And then it comes back into the small little venules, into the little bigger veins, into these large vena cava, these are both called, the largest veins in our body, and then back to the right side of the heart. I homeschool one of my children, and he's actually doing the heart right now. And what I had him do, and maybe it would help you guys too, is he cut out a diagram of the heart, and then he uses red and blue yarn so it gives that that tactile learning as well, if you're into that. Or some people just like to draw it out, and it helps to stick in your brain a little better. So he actually uses a needle and thread to show the pathway of the blood. This is an up close of a capillary and a red blood cell, so it just shows how teeny tiny the capillaries are, because a red blood cell pretty much takes up the whole circumference of the inside. And then over here it's showing capillaries, being able to give oxygen and nutrients out into the interstitial fluid and into our cells. And then also the waste is being brought back into the blood to be brought back to the heart. Or some waste products are gotten rid of other places, which we'll talk about in like our kidney section, for example. Question 5. So this comes down to like, what is our blood made up of? So which of these cells is responsible for disease fighting? Red blood cells, white blood cells, or platelets and fibrin? So something to note, another word for fibrin is actually fibrinogen. So if you see fibrinogen, hint hint for a test, that's what fibrin and platelets are, the two things that go together in that section. So would it be A, B, or C? The cells responsible for disease fighting. Any guesses? B, that's right. White blood cells are responsible for disease fighting. And if you've read any of the immune system yet, you will learn all about them. Now, red blood cells are responsible for transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide primarily. And then platelets and fibrinogen is for blood clotting. So the makeup of our blood, so a little over half is plasma, which is kind of a clear fluid that is really the medium for transporting other things like vitamins, minerals, and it's what our blood cells travel in. So it's similar to the makeup of our interstitial fluid, plasma is. And then a smaller portion, this one's kind of better here, a smaller portion of our blood is made up of the white blood cells and platelets, and then red blood cells take up a fairly large chunk of it as well. So about 55% is plasma, and right here it shows that plasma is actually 90% water, and then some other dissolved substances in it. And then cellular elements, so the other 45% is red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and fibrinogen. So we touch briefly on some diseases of cardiovascular system. Leukemia is one that's kind of has to do with our cardiovascular, it has to do with blood cells, but also with our immune system. So that's leukemia, which is a cancer of those disease-fighting white blood cells. And it talks about stem cells as a treatment, so something to just be aware of. Stem cells are cells that have not yet been your body hasn't yet told it what it can be. So there's all kinds of options now in research and current treatments where they can tell stem cells to be certain cells in order to replace unhealthy ones. And that's one treatment for leukemia, where they get rid of all of the cancerous material, replace it with stem cells in the hopes that those stem cells will then develop into healthy tissue rather than cancerous. And this is just showing how a lot of research is involved with stem cells. So after they take out the stem cells, they generate them, to working on them becoming liver cells or more red blood cells or, cartilage for joints. Nerve cells is a big one that they're trying to perfect in order to help people with things like paraplegia. Okay, so cardiovascular disease. So this is kind of all-encompassing of diseases that affect the heart and blood vessels, such as heart attacks and atherosclerosis. I think I have a diagram on one of the upcoming slides there for what atherosclerosis is. About 70,000 people die each year in Canada from cardiovascular disease, 50,000 from strokes. So stroke is considered a cardiovascular disease because it's either a blockage of a blood vessel or a blood vessel has ruptured, causing like cell death around the area. And just a little stat there, like 40% of Canadians have high blood cholesterol, and 1.6 million live with cardiovascular disease. So what disease is, oh, I guess this is the diagram I just talked about. What disease is associated with plaque-lined arteries? And you don't have to write that big long word, but it is atherosclerosis. So that's when plaque builds up in our arteries and partially blocks the passageway of blood. So it can cause things like heart attack and stroke. So what can you do to reduce risks of cardiovascular disease? So not smoking is a big one. Know your risk factors. So an example there is cholesterol level, but also, strong family history can give you a risk factor as well. Keep your blood pressure under control. High blood pressure increases your risk of stroke, and that's because if you have a lot of pressure, like higher than normal pressure on the inside of your arteries, eventually those arteries are going to stop working. Those blood vessels will stop working properly. You're not going to get as much blood flow. They can weaken and not stretch as well. Exercising regularly, so that improves heart health. Eating a heart-healthy diet, so, avoiding some of those trans fats and some of those less healthy things that we talked about in the digestive unit. Achieving and maintaining a healthy weight is important. You have better circulation if your body is at a healthier weight. And then managing diabetes. So that's a growing epidemic in Canada and in a lot of the industrialized world, actually. And it does increase your risk for heart disease. So signs of stroke, put this in there, like, one side of your face drooping, not being able to raise both arms, speech being slurred or jumbled. So cardiovascular disease and homeostasis. So your book kind of touches on this a little bit, but can any of you think of an example of how our cardiovascular system helps create homeostasis in our body? So if we remember, homeostasis is like a relatively stable environment happening within our bodies. Can you think of any examples? So one kind of neat example, blood pressure, yes, that is one. So we have a relatively stable blood pressure happening in our body. Yep. A kind of a neat example of it is when our body, so a lot of our body systems are driven by either our nervous system or our endocrine system, so by hormones. And we have a neat hormone that's given off by our kidneys, actually, that when our body is not getting a proper amount of oxygen, our body can give off this special hormone, and it talks about this a bit, I think, in blood doping, when it talks about athletes using blood doping. So EPO is the hormone, and when our body recognizes that we're not quite getting enough oxygen, it gives off this hormone, which allows more red blood cells to be created. So the more red blood cells we have, the more oxygen we can circulate. So that's kind of cool. And athletes use it by injecting that hormone, and then their body's kind of artificially making more red blood cells. And so if their body's able to, get rid of carbon dioxide faster and get more oxygen to their bodies faster, then they're going to be able to perform better during cardio exercise. Any questions? So the pathway of blood through the heart can be a little bit confusing, but the more you talk yourself through it, draw pictures of it, that kind of thing, the easier it will get. I like to watch videos when I learn new things like that require a lot of steps. And writing it down is big for me too. Not an artist, no. That's why you can print off the diagram and then just draw the pathway of blood. Use a blue marker and a red marker and just draw it in. And then you don't have to draw a heart, because a heart is kind of bad to draw. In fact, if you look through my YouTube channel, I have all kinds of odd videos there from, some CCA classes and stuff, so I've probably drawn a few hearts in those videos, and they don't always work out so well. Yes, I love the tutorials in Mastering Biology. I hope they're the same since they changed things over, but there are some good ones there. They're very high-tech and edited. So again, I have that pre-recorded review of the immune system for you to look at. So we can take a peek. If you have any other questions, just post them away. And I will post some of the review questions that I picked out here for our cardiovascular system. So here's the first one. So again, you can click right on the screen for these answers. Which type of blood vessel is best suited for chemical exchange between blood and cells? And you guys are correct. It is the capillaries. Okay, let me find the next one. The buildup of plaque on the walls of arteries increases the risk for heart attack and stroke. This buildup of plaque is a condition known as... Anyone else want to click on an answer? And you are correct, whoever it is that answered. It's atherosclerosis. So it's a buildup of plaque, and it's also like a hardening of the wall of the artery. Next. Blood pressure that is consistently above which two numbers is considered hypertension? You guys are correct. It's 140/90. So an average would be the 120/80, or below, a little below is good actually. Find my next question. Which of these would carry oxygen-poor blood? Pulmonary arteries, pulmonary veins, aorta, or left ventricle? So this is one of those ones that you may have to really think about. It's a good one that you cover it up, try to answer it in your head first, and then go through each option. So we have some mixed results here. So pulmonary arteries is correct. So pulmonary arteries, so arteries always go away from the heart. And in this case, the artery is going away, pulmonary artery is going away from the heart to the lungs. So this is pretty much the only artery that is going to be have oxygen poor blood inside of it. Pulmonary veins are coming back from the lungs. So again, there's the only vein that's pretty much the only vein that's going to have oxygen-rich blood because it's just coming back from the artery and going back to the heart. Aorta, of course, is the biggest artery in the body, so artery away, that one's going out to the body, it's oxygen-rich. And the left ventricle is is pumping out to the body as well after the lungs, so that one is oxygen-rich. Let me find the next one. I think we have a few more maybe. Did I already show this one? No, I didn't. So veins carry blood away from the heart or blood toward the heart. And you guys are correct. Veins carry blood toward the heart. Arteries away, AA. Veins going back toward the heart. Get my numbers mixed up a little bit here. I don't know if I may have already showed this question. I don't know. Nope. Okay, true or false? Blood pressure is higher during the systolic heart cycle because the heart muscle is contracting to push blood through the body. True or false? Hey, I'm so happy. You got it right. It's true. So systolic is the higher number in blood pressure, and that's when the heart is contracting. Oh, I already did that one. And did I do this one? Yes, I did that one. Okay, I think I have one more. A pacemaker would help someone when this part of the heart is not working effectively. The aorta, ventricles, SA node, or AV node. You are correct. It is the SA node. So that's the natural pacemaker of the heart. And I think that's all of the review questions I have. So if you guys have any questions, please ask. And if not, that'll pretty much wrap us up for this Skype session. Check out the other videos I've already posted. And any more questions, please ask away in the Q&A board. And hopefully these units are feeling okay for you guys. That's good. Thank you guys for joining. You can go eat your supper if you haven't already.